Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show today. My name is Tim Small. My guest on today's show is Christina Murray. Christina plays Americana and country music, rooted and steeped in troubadour storytelling and southern rock grit. Christina currently lives in Nashville, active in the independent country and Americana scene. Christina, welcome to the show.
Hey, Tim. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you on the show today, Christina. You were originally from Atlanta, Georgia, and then I believe you moved to Colorado, and now you found yourself in Nashville. So I'm sure you're very happy living there now because Nashville is certainly a hub for musicians these days. But what has your journey been like in terms of relocating from various parts of America?
Oh, man, that's a great question. When I moved to Colorado, I was moving from rural South Carolina. That's where I went to college. I grew up in Atlanta and I had never really lived outside of the South before. So when I moved out to Colorado, I was young. I was 21 and I was really looking for something really different. And most people, a lot of people that I knew that had traveled outside of the South had said, it's very important to get out of this region and live elsewhere in the country just because America's so varied and in its regions and in its ideas and what's happening in different parts of the country. So it's pretty good and healthy to explore those different things. So I was pretty young, and when I moved to Colorado, I had been into bluegrass for a few years, and there was kind of a buzzing little progressive bluegrass scene that was out there. And I wanted to explore, you know, becoming a better musician and what that meant. It was mostly motivated by that. And so I moved out there and got really into the bluegrass music scene, which then eventually evolved into wanting to learn more about traditional country. I knew some traditional country growing up. My parents listened to a variety of music, mostly rock and roll, but a variety of stuff. So I knew some country music and I knew some popular country music growing up, but I never really hadn't really delved into the old stuff. So when I was learning bluegrass and studying bluegrass when I lived out there, I got really into country music. And then at some point, it kind of became clear that just due to the locale of where Colorado was, and, it's so far from my whole family that lived in the South still, and just the kind of music that I was wanting to make, which was, I wanted to start to discover and explore how to write my own music and meet other young people that were doing the same thing, that were influenced by some of the same influences that I had musically. So, I kind of reached a peak place in Colorado and actually just got really fed up with the weather too out there because it snows a lot. And then, about six and a half years ago, I decided to move to Nashville. So it's been a very varied journey. And sometimes I get frustrated with myself that I feel like I maybe wasted time in Colorado, but I also learned how to be a musician out there. I learned the Nashville number system and I really studied music and music form, wrote and recorded my first record out there, performed, learned how to play 3.5 to 4 hours worth of covers, which was important for, musical education. And then when I moved here, I got a little bit frustrated with my lack of knowledge on the business side of how to run myself as a small business or as an independent artist as a small business and how to network, things like that. So it's been an up and down journey. And just in the last, I don't know, maybe 2 years, have I felt like, okay, I'm starting to grasp how to do this. And then of course, in March, everything got upended. So, so now it's a new challenge, I guess. A new, I don't know. It kind of feels like a left turn in the journey almost, right? Pandemic. So
Your latest full length record, Southern Ambrosia, I'm sure you're really excited about this record. I mean, it's an absolute masterpiece. The songwriting is fantastic. Just from a sonic point of view, it just sounds incredible. Wow, I'm sure there's lots that we can talk about here. So I'm just going to give you the opportunity just to tell the listeners a little bit about Southern Ambrosia.
Sure. It is a record I'm extremely proud of, and for better or worse, all the emotions that go along with that. So it's almost now, I guess it'll be 2 years old in September, which I guess relatively speaking is not that old yet. But so that album, I had about a third of the songs written as I was moving to Nashville. So I had, when I moved to Nashville, Unraveling was a little less than a year old, but nobody in Nashville cared. So it's almost like if it wasn't recorded in Nashville, nobody really gave a shit. But so when I moved here, I had a few songs written and I had my eye towards like, okay, start to think about a new record in the next year or so. Cause the process takes so long of finding people and booking dates and making the record and then doing the artwork and like getting the promo together, before you know it, it's been 2 years and you don't have a new album or new work or anything to put out. So when I moved here in 2014, I was looking to, you know, co-writing and meeting people to write with and really, diving into writing my next full length. So I had a few songs and then I met a few folks and wrote a couple more songs. And then when I looked at the collection that I had, right at about 2016, I felt really ready to record the album. It felt really cohesive. It had a lot to do with life as a Southerner, and especially in the 21st century and all the kind of juxtapositions that go along with that, being proud of being Southern, but and some of the traditions and cultural piece that goes along with that, being proud of the diversity of this region, but also being torn completely and heartbroken by the legacy of this region. So I feel like a lot of that is explored on there, and there's some political commentary on there. There's one song, Slow Kill, that I didn't write until about a month before we recorded it. So it's the most recent song on that record. But anyway, so about 2016, mid 2016, I had a majority of the songs that became Southern Ambrosia, was making plans to record with a producer in town. And then my relationship with my then boyfriend fell apart and just came to a crashing halt, tragic end. And so that kind of derailed my life for 6 months or so. And then within that time period of, kind of grieving the end of that relationship and, going through that, I met Mike Rennie, or I knew Mike Rennie through a couple of mutual friends, but we were at a show, the Cannery Ballroom. He said to me, he was like, I really want to produce your album. Please let me produce your record. Because I had talked to him about playing bass on my album. He's an incredible bass player. But he said, no, I want to produce it. And so I was like, I wasn't, I was just, my head was so cloudy because I was going through this grieving period of my breakup. And so, a month later or so, he called and said, listen, I booked some studio dates. I'm going to get some session guys. We're just going to go in and I want to cut these 4 songs. He's like, and if you like how it turns out, we'll talk about recording the rest of the album together. If you don't like how it turns out, then no sweat. You don't owe me anything. We'll just call it a fun weekend and we'll go from there. So that's kind of how the genesis of that record happened. December, I think the last 2 or 3 days of December of 2016, we went into Welcome to 79, which is an analog studio here in Nashville. And we cut 4 or 5 songs, which then ultimately became half of Southern Ambrosia. And then a few months later, in May of 2017, we finished the rest of the record. And in that time period, I wrote Slow Kill. I wrote it about 2 months after Trump was elected. And so that's really how that album came about. I am very proud of it. I do, like I was saying before, I think there's a really strong thematic element in that album. I feel like it showcases some of my best songwriting, but also a lot of my influences. There's some blues in there. There's some straight folk. Obviously, a lot of country. It's a country album. So yeah, that's Southern Ambrosia. I mean, I could probably talk about it for a long time, but that's it in a 5-minute nutshell, I suppose.
One of my favorite tracks, if not my favorite track on the record, is Strong Blood. So I believe that the title Southern Ambrosia actually comes from a line in the song. Could you maybe tell us more about that?
So that song, I started writing it in the summer of 2016. I was bartending, and I would finish my shift and I would come home, and the house I was living in at the time also didn't have AC, central AC. So I would sit in front of the window unit and I'd crank it on, and I'd pick up, I was messing around on an electric guitar a little bit at that time, and I'd sit in front of the AC unit and I'd mess around. And that's how I wrote that song. So Strong Blood, I suppose the idea of it is behind ambrosia, being the food from the gods, the nectar of the gods. And the idea there is that there are things that the American South gives us, or the state of Georgia in particular, with regards to me, because that's where I'm from, give to us that are unique to that region. And I highlight Georgia peaches, the fruit, and which is a perfect food, and then the Allman Brothers, which is one of my favorite bands, and a band that I grew up hearing all the time. My parents were big fans of that band, and just living in Georgia, you hear that music it's kind of the background music of your life in a lot of ways. So I kind of give a nod to both of those in there, and I call them Southern Ambrosia. But yeah, that's a very autobiographical song. I talk about my dad there. The only thing that daddy left was a little dust on the shelf. And that's literally talking about his ashes. He was a working man and he died suddenly. And, that's kind of that, I suppose. I wrote that song. I started writing that song a couple of weeks after the Pulse nightclub shooting. So the second verse about, news, the newsman on the radio today said it's worse than yesterday. There ain't no sweet relief. It's just, that line is directly from, the feeling of despair that you get when you listen to the news, especially now. Holy cow. But yeah, but there's a quiet hopefulness in it too, because sometimes as artists, the only relief maybe we can get is through the creative work that we do. And that's what I was trying to convey in that song, is that, singing and writing and, especially performing, bring me a lot of joy and a lot of relief for those kind of heavy emotions. And that's what I was trying to say there. So, and I nod to the fact that my dad was stubborn, but he was also an empath and very courageous and hard worker. And I hope that I have those qualities in myself. Some days I recognize that I do, and some days that I don't. So that's kind of what that song talks about and is about.
Well, it's certainly great to hear that your father has influenced you so much and that his presence is strongly felt on Southern Ambrosia, both sonically and lyrically. I believe that he actually gave you your very first guitar at the age of 16 and a couple of really cool records too. So he's been a really big influence in your life.
Totally. Well, so my folks didn't have a vinyl record player in our house growing up. So we just had CDs. And it wasn't until probably like 10 years ago, I was in the attic of my mama's house, and I opened this old trunk, and oh my gosh, it was like full of amazing, all this incredible vinyl. And I was like, Mom, you've been hiding this, when I finally got into vinyl and collecting vinyl albums. And anyway, so yeah, so they were big music lovers, and we always had some really incredible CDs. I think when I was in 4th grade, I got my first CD player, and I got the Space Jam soundtrack, the Spice Girls album, Spice Girl Spice, and Cat Stevens' Tea for the Tillerman. Those are my three first CDs. And then from there, my dad, he was always listening. We always had a cassette tape of Graceland in the car. Live at the Fillmore East, that was always on. All my brothers Live at the Fillmore East was always on. I grew up thinking that a 20-minute song was normal because of Mountain Jam on that record. Yeah, so we had some really incredible music growing up. My mama was a big Jesse Coulter fan. She had a couple Emmylou records. So they were very influential, musically for me from a pretty early age. And that Graceland record is so, it for the first several years after my dad died, I couldn't even listen to that album or pretty much a lot of Bob Dylan. It just reminded me too much of him. But now it's a very happy memory to be able to sing along to all those songs.
Yeah, it's incredible to discover how successful Paul Simon's Graceland has been. Of course, with me being from South Africa, I heard that record when I was younger because, of course, it was recorded here. And Ladysmith Black Mambazo have had a great career as a result of the exposure from recording with Paul Simon. And my brother and I used to listen to that record a lot growing up. In fact, he's got a poster of it now in his house. And I laughed the other day because my cousin only heard this album, I think, for the first time in her life a year or two ago. And I thought to myself, wow, I was listening to that when I was a kid, So there's still people that are discovering that record.
Well, that's a great thing about classic timeless music. And I always hope that can be true for my music, is that for someone that has never heard it, it's brand new. And that is what always continues to blow me away about music as an art form. It's like this never ending treasure trove of music. Like I just this summer really got into Nick Lowe. I hadn't really listened to a bunch of his music, but I've been like, consuming it this summer because it's new to me. So it's just, I don't know. I feel very blessed for music to be such a big part of my life. And I don't even really say blessed all that often. I feel very fortunate, that music is such a huge part of my life and something I love to do.
And speaking of classic and timeless music, I mean, you certainly had some classic and timeless albums, Space Jam, Spice Girls, and Tea for the Tillerman. So, Christina, I noticed on your Instagram account that you have a really lovely photo up there where you have chosen a couple of timeless tracks for, I believe it's your nieces. Can you tell us more about this project?
Yeah. So that was definitely I was super bored in quarantine kind of project. And the idea started was my boyfriend and I were coming back from a show of mine, and we were listening to a Malcolm Gladwell podcast where he interviews Booker T. And that's an incredible interview. Booker T is like the most zen motherfucker. I mean, he's just like, he has such a soothing voice. Anyway, so we were talking and I was just so amazed by, oh my gosh, like I forget how much incredible music he was a part of. And they were playing Green Onions, in the background. And I was like, God, this is such an iconic song. And that's kind of so the project for my niece and for my nephew kind of was born out of that. I was like, God, there's so much incredible music that I even forget about because I don't have like a couple towers of CDs staring me in the face. And, I've got a handful of albums, but I don't have, a 200 vinyl collection by any means. So all of our music is streamed online, right? So we're not looking at it in the face. I can't see like, oh man, this BB King Live CD that I haven't played in 4 months, I forgot about it. Let me put it on right now. That just doesn't happen with non-tangible music anymore. So I was thinking like, how can I make all of the important music, presentable to someone that's 8 years old. So, my 8-year-old niece, she likes Billie Eilish, and that's great. And, she likes music that's on the radio and that her friends like. But to me, there's just so much, a musical education is so important, and it's so vast. It's almost like, where do you even start? So I came up with like, well, let me do a full month's worth of songs and pick from various genres and influential, like incredibly influential artists, genre defining artists and bands. And so what I did was I picked, songs like, oh gosh, I picked, a song from Paul Simon and Grateful Dead and Led Zeppelin and Sister Rosetta Tharpe and Chuck Berry and just all sorts of artists that I thought are important for kids to know that they may not know. And I picked a song and I wrote a little bit about the artist or the band. And I took a postcard, so, 3x5 postcard, and I wrote a little, fun factoid about the band or the artist. And I wrote a little bit about the song. And then on the other side, I drew a picture that either correlated to the song or a picture of the artist. And I did 30 of those and I sent them to my niece. And the whole idea is that every day for a month, she would pull a card out and say, hey, I think they have a Google, not an Alexa. She would say, hey, Google, play Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash. And then she would hear, she would then read also the information on the backside. So it's kind of a multiply beneficial because she's practicing reading and reading aloud. And so she would read that a lot. My sister would film it. She would read it and then she would say, hey, Google. And then they would listen to the song. And it would be things like, on Ring of Fire, Johnny Cash is known as the Man in Black. And this song features a strong horn section, and listen for that. And this song was written by a woman named June Carter Cash. And so yeah, that was kind of the idea behind that. I keep forgetting that I did that because it was such a labor of love. And when I got about halfway through, I was like, oh man, this is a lot of work, but I was really proud of that. And a few people have been like, you should patent that and sell it. So maybe if I get really hard up for money, I'll do it again because it was such a joy it was really hard to narrow it down. But obviously, like I said, it's just, there's even more music to be discovered at all times. So I could do it again and again.
Yeah, I can see you put a lot of effort into that, and it's great to hear the backstory regarding the project. And I think I'll certainly pull this up and do the 30-day Christina Murray Tastemaker Adventure in Music. Well, speaking of quarantine, I know that you have released a single recently. Did it come out during quarantine? Can you tell us more about this latest single?
Yeah, it actually came out at the beginning of July. I think I put it out, July 3rd. This song is a song called The Great Unknown. And so back in January, I was doing a lot of co-writing. I think I had 4 weeks straight where I was doing a couple co-writes a week, just because that is something that had fallen off for me. And then last year I hadn't been doing that so much. And I wanted to get back into it just to see just to remind myself that I do like co-writing with certain people. And my friend Leo Rondeau, he's a country singer here in town. He used to live in Austin, but he moved to Nashville a couple of years ago. And I was a fan of him and his music for a few years. And then when he moved to Nashville, he and I got to be friends. And we did a little tour last year together, a couple dates together. And I told him that I wanted to write with him because he has a very distinct writing style that's really conversational and can be kind of funny and witty, but sometimes in a tragic way. And I really wanted to explore that for myself. So anyway, I had him come over to the house and it was our first time writing together, and we kind of mustered out this song called The Great Unknown. And so this was end of January. And I really liked it a lot. I thought it was just a really simple musing on being grateful. And I feel like we wrote it in a way that isn't cheesy. So I wanted to record it because I hadn't really done any recording in a while. And my friend Thomas Brian Eaton, he lives in North Nashville. Him and his girlfriend have a house that has a studio. And he called me up a few days before Super Bowl Sunday, I think, which is basically a national holiday here in America. And he was like, hey, do you want to come and record some songs this weekend? And I was out of town. I was like, I'll be back Sunday evening. If we can find some guys that want to record, I have a song that I really want to record. It might be kind of tough because it's Super Bowl Sunday. So anyway, I was driving back to Nashville that that morning, and I was hitting up a few friends, my bass player, Jonathan, and my friend Taylor, who plays drums. And I was like, hey, what are y'all doing tonight? Do you want to come record a song instead of watching the Super Bowl? And everybody was down. And it was just really casual. We went in and we listened to the song. It's a pretty easy mellow tune. And Thomas got our mutual friend, Asa, to come and play steel. And anyway, we just laid down Great Unknown that then became the single. And I feel so grateful that we did, because, a month later we went into quarantine. So I don't know. It's funny to me. Mike Rennie, my producer on Southern Ambrosia, when we were recording the song Tell Me from that album, which is kind of a heartbreaking song, I was in the vocal booth and I was getting upset because, I had recently broken up with my boyfriend, and the song is a little bit about that. But I had written it before we broke up. And Mike Rennie said to me, what Johnny Cash told Roseanne Cash was that songs are like little postcards from the future. And I thought that was such a beautiful idea. And I think that is so true. And I feel like that's really true with this song, Great Unknown, because, we wrote that in January. I recorded it in February. And then, quarantine and the pandemic happened in March. And the song is just really about being content with and okay with, the way that your life is, and realizing that as humans, we're just here for this tiny little, not even a wisp of a blink of an, not even eyelash on a blink of an eye, and in this vast, vast universe. And so it's all this kind of elements swirling together, being happy with a beautiful Sunday morning and a cup of coffee. And I think that, I don't know, I feel like between me and Leo, it was certainly a piece of art by collective. It couldn't have come to fruition without my friend Leo and particularly my friend Thomas that recorded it as well, who kind of captured the ethereal nature of that song. So that's the Great Unknown. And then, when we recorded it, you can hear me laugh at the beginning. And then when my friend Justin was mixing and mastering it in the initial round, he took out my laugh, and we were all like, no, you got to put that back in there, because that's part of the song.
Yeah, well, 2020 certainly been a bizarre year, and I think the listeners will agree that we're really fortunate and lucky to have musicians such as yourself just creating amazing art for us to essentially consume during these difficult times. I mean, I've been listening to Southern Ambrosia now a lot over the last few weeks, and it just makes me really happy to hear the record. I love listening to it when I'm driving in my car or, walking around a wine farm. So yeah, I'm a big fan of your music, and I'm sure many of the listeners that are listening to this episode are too, but I'm sure there's some that are discovering your music for the first time. So if they want to go and check more of your work out, they can visit your website at christinamurray.net. Of course, all of your music is available on the streaming platforms, but if they want to get a good sense of your entire discography, they can also visit your Bandcamp website, which is christinamurray.bandcamp.com. What else do you have in store for the future for the fans?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for listening to the album. It's always exciting to know that anyone anywhere is listening, especially like halfway across the world. How rad is that? I just really love that. And I appreciate all your kind words about the music. But as far as what's coming up, I'm just been writing, not a ton, but a fair amount. And I've got some songs that I actually think are decent. So I've been demoing with my producer for, the last few months. And the hope is that by the end of the year to get in and start recording the new record. But this producer is a little bit more, he likes to take things at a bit of a slower pace. And I am learning how to work with that. And I think that's really healthy, because I want to obviously write the absolutely best album that I can write. And so that's a matter of writing a bunch of songs and distilling it down to what are the best ones. So for me right now, it's just a bunch of writing, a bunch of work taping, and working with my producer. And then as far as, since none of us really know when we're going to get to go back to performing live and in person at venues and bars and all that, I'm hoping it'll be next summer, but who knows? So I believe that I'll be doing a few live streams here this fall. I did a couple in the spring, but yeah, I would like to do another live stream in the fall and probably September or October, maybe one or two. So I would just advise fans and new fans and friends to look out for that on the socials. And yeah, maybe a release here or there. I've got a handful more kind of stored away that I could put out. So we'll see.
Awesome. So lots to look forward to from Christina Murray. And I certainly will dream about sometime in the future where I could perhaps catch a live concert of you at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. So, Christina, thank you so much for joining me today on the show. I really appreciate it, and I know the listeners do too. So I know that you're getting ready to go kayaking today. I hope you have a great time on the river. Whereabouts are you going to be hitting the river?
There's a couple options: the Piney River, the Harpeth, and then we were also talking about going to the Duck River. So I'd be happy with any of those. It's looking like it might rain, but it hasn't yet. So I'm hoping we can get out there soon and avoid any sort of downpour. But yeah, thank you so much for having me, Tim.